When the lawyer said my cousin's name instead of mine, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I remember gripping the edge of that oak conference table, my nails digging into the wood. All properties and financial assets to Mr. Adrian Kahn. For a moment, the name didn't register. Adrian? My cousin Adrian, the boy who used to steal mangoes from my mother's tree, who shared his last slice of pizza with me at family picnics, who once promised we'd always look out for each other. Surely, this was some kind of mistake. But as the lawyer continued reading my mother's will, line by line, my name never came. Not once. Adrian sat across from me in a neatly pressed shirt, his hands folded, face calm. Too calm. When our eyes met, he gave me a small, polite nod, not the warm grin I'd known since childhood, but something colder, restrained. My throat tightened. My mother had left everything, to him. Her house, the land my father built our home on, the savings account she guarded like a treasure chest, even the old gold bangles she'd promised me when I was a little girl. The lawyer cleared his throat, sliding a document toward me. Your mother stated, in her own words, that Adrian was the most responsible family member. She trusted him to continue her legacy. Responsible. That word stung like a slap. I wasn't perfect, but I'd cared for her until her last breath. I was there through the hospital visits, the sleepless nights, the endless pills and fragile hope. Adrian only came by once in a while, dropping off fruit baskets and acting like a saint. And somehow, he was the one she trusted. I didn't cry then. I couldn't. My chest felt hollow, my voice trapped behind disbelief. The air smelled faintly of dust and paper, sterile, official, but all I could smell was betrayal. I left that office without saying goodbye to anyone. Outside, the sky was gray, heavy with rain that never came. Before that day, life had been simple, modest but peaceful. I lived in a small brick house at the edge of town, the kind with creaky floors and a garden that never quite bloomed right. I taught literature at the local school, spent my evenings reading with a cup of tea, and visited my mother every weekend. She'd gotten frailier over the past year. Age and illness had slowed her down, but her spirit remained sharp, sometimes too sharp. She was proud, opinionated, and loved to be in control. Our bond wasn't perfect, but it was rooted in love. We'd argue, make up, and laugh over the same stories she'd told me since I was a girl. Stories about my late father, about resilience, about how family is the only real wealth you ever keep. And then there was Adrian. Adrian was my mother's sister's son, my first cousin. He'd been practically raised in our house. My mother adored him, always calling him her other child. When we were little, he was playful and mischievous, but as we grew older, he became polished, charming in that quiet, calculating way that made people trust him. He worked in real estate, always dressed neatly, spoke softly, and seemed to know exactly what to say to win people over. After my father passed away, Adrian started visiting more often, fixing leaky pipes, helping with paperwork, bringing my mother groceries. She would beam every time he walked in, saying, "That boy's got a good heart." I didn't disagree, not then. He was family. I remember one Sunday, while I was making tea, my mother said, "You could learn something from Adrian, you know. He's stable, dependable." I'd smiled, though it hurt a little. And what am I, Mom? Unstable and reckless. She laughed, waving her hand. No, darling. You just live too much in your heart. It wasn't meant to wound me, but it did. Because she was right. I did live in my heart. Every choice I'd made, from leaving a high-paying job to care for her, to ending a relationship that drained me, came from that place. And yet, in the end, she didn't trust my heart at all. The days after the funeral were a blur. The house smelled of incense and stale flowers. I wandered from room to room, touching her things, her shawl, her comb, the cup that still held the stain of her last tea. I'd hoped to feel her presence there, but instead the house felt foreign, empty. When I returned a week later to start organizing her belongings, Adrian's car was already in the driveway, his expensive black sedan, gleaming like it didn't belong in our humble yard. He was inside, sorting through her mail. Just like that, as if the house was already his. "Adrian," I said from the doorway. He turned, startled at first, then smiled politely. "Mara, I was just handling a few things." the utility bills, the bank letters. You know how Auntie was with her paperwork. I stepped closer, trying to steady my breath. You shouldn't be here alone. He shrugged, looking at ease. Well, technically, it's my responsibility now. Your mother trusted me to settle everything. His words hit like stones. My responsibility. I wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that this was my home, my mother. But something in his eyes told me he was expecting that reaction. So I didn't give it to him. Instead, I just said softly, "She loved you like a son. I hope you remember that." He smiled, that same small, unreadable smile I'd seen at the lawyer's office. "Of course I do." Then he turned away, busying himself with her documents, as if I were the intruder. I stood there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall. The same clock that had marked every Sunday tea between my mother and me. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't just grief. It was a weight, a quiet, crawling suspicion that this wasn't an accident. That Adrian hadn't just been lucky to be in her will, he'd engineered it. And though I couldn't prove it yet, I could feel it in my bones. My mother had been convinced, manipulated, to believe I was unworthy. I left that day with a single thought echoing in my head. If he took everything from me, I'd take back the truth. The first real clue came 2 weeks later, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I'd gone back to my mother's house again. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stay away. Her perfume still lingered in the hallway. A soft mix of jasmine and something faintly sweet, like honey. I used to think that smell meant home. Now it only reminded me of what I'd lost. Adrian had already changed the locks. He said it was for safety. I remember standing on the porch, trying to steady my breath as he fumbled with his keys. "You could have at least told me," I said. He smiled politely, not looking up. "I was going to. But it's standard procedure. Auntie's estate is under my name now, and the lawyer advised." "The lawyer advised you to treat me like a trespasser?" I cut in. His smile faded just a little, replaced with something colder. "Don't make this harder than it already is, Mara. I'm just trying to do what she wanted." I wanted to ask him what she really wanted, but I bit my tongue. The more I watched him move through that house with such quiet confidence, the more I felt that something had been set in motion long before my mother's death. Later that afternoon, I went to the community center to clear my head. My art students were working on self-portraits, and their laughter, bright, innocent, made the heaviness in my chest feel lighter for a while. But when I checked my phone after class, there was a message from an unknown number. "Unknown. I'm sorry about your mother. I thought you should know. Adrian came to the lawyer's office weeks before she passed. Alone. No name. No context. Just that." I read it twice, then 3 times, my pulse rising. It could have been anyone, a prank, a mistake, but something about the timing, the phrasing made my skin prickle. Adrian had told me he helped her with her paperwork. But this sounded like more than that. I called the number back immediately. No answer. When I tried again, it went straight to voicemail. For the rest of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trying to tell me something. And that Adrian's calm composure wasn't just confidence. It was guilt, neatly disguised. The next Sunday, I went to visit my mother's friend, Aunt Salma, a woman I'd known since childhood. She lived a few streets away and had been close to my mother right till the end. When she opened the door, her eyes softened. "Oh, my dear Mara, you look thinner." I smiled faintly. "It's been a hard few weeks." She led me into her sitting room. The same one that smelled of rosewater and cardamom tea, just like always. We sat down and she reached for my hand. "I heard about the will," she said quietly. "You must be devastated." "I am," I admitted. "But I keep wondering, did my mother say anything before she passed? Anything about Adrian?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she looked down. "She talked about him often," she said carefully. "She said he'd been a big help with her finances. That he took care of everything when she couldn't." I frowned. Her finances? She never let anyone touch her accounts. Not even me. She changed after the hospital stay. Aunt Salma said, shaking her head. She started to believe Adrian knew better about those things. He told her you were too busy, that you were overwhelmed with work. My stomach twisted. I never said that, I whispered. I know. She hesitated, glancing toward the window as if afraid someone might be listening. But your mother trusted him completely. He showed her some documents, said they were from her lawyer. I never saw them myself, but I remember she seemed uneasy afterward. My pulse quickened. Uneasy how? She asked me once if you were angry with her. I told her no, of course not. But she just sighed and said, maybe she should be. I froze. Those words, maybe she should be, echoed in my head like a whisper from the grave. Something had poisoned her against me, and I had a sinking feeling it was my cousin's doing. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every memory, every little comment Adrian had made, every time he'd handled something for my mother. He had slowly positioned himself as the responsible one, the protector. And I, without realizing it, had become the emotional daughter who couldn't be trusted. The manipulation wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, the kind that hides inside kindness. The next morning, I went back to my mother's house again. I told myself it was to collect some personal things, her letters, her shawl. But deep down, I wanted to see. Adrian wasn't there. I used the spare key I'd hidden under the flower pot years ago. Inside, the house felt different. The walls seemed barer. Several paintings were missing, including one I'd made for her birthday last year. I moved through each room, careful not to disturb anything. But when I reached her study, the one room Adrian rarely let me into after the funeral, I noticed a drawer slightly ajar. Inside were scattered papers, hospital bills, insurance statements, and one envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a letter to me. It was one she'd written to her lawyer, 3 weeks before she died. Dear Mr. Ahmed, I've been thinking about revising my will again. Adrian insists it's not necessary, but I have my doubts. I'm not sure he always tells me everything. Could we meet privately to discuss this? The letter was never sent. There was no stamp, no postmark, just folded and tucked away. I sank into her chair, staring at the words until they blurred. If she doubted him, why didn't she act? Why hadn't anyone helped her? Then I noticed something else. In the bottom of the drawer, half buried under papers, was a USB drive. My mother had never used computers much. She barely checked her email. But Adrian did. And I had a feeling whatever was on that drive might tell me what he'd been doing in those last few weeks. I slipped the drive into my pocket and left quietly, locking the door behind me. The wind outside was cold, sharp, the kind that carries change in its breath. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. Grief had kept me paralyzed. But now I had something else, purpose. I didn't know what I'd find on that drive. But I knew one thing for sure. My mother hadn't betrayed me by choice. Someone had helped her do it. And that someone was my cousin. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the USB drive between my fingers, turning it over and over like it might reveal its secrets on its own. The little piece of plastic felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of every question I'd been too afraid to ask. I plugged it into my laptop. The screen blinked to life, and for a moment I thought nothing was there. Just one folder titled Aunt's Files. I clicked it open. Inside were several PDFs, medical bills, old photos, insurance statements, and one folder labeled Will_Draft_Adrian. My breath caught. I opened it. There were 2 documents inside. 1. Will_original.pdf. 2. Will_updated_final.pdf. I clicked the original first. It was dated 3 months before my mother's death, leaving everything to me. The house, the savings, the jewelry, all clearly stated. There was even a line that said, "To my daughter, Mara, who has cared for me with love and patience." My eyes blurred as I read it. That was my mother's voice, proud, affectionate, real. Then I opened the updated one. It was dated just 3 weeks later. Same format, same legal header, but everything was different. My name was gone. Every mention of me erased, replaced with Adrian's. And the justification section read, "Due to my daughter's unstable emotional state and financial irresponsibility, I wish to entrust my assets to my nephew, Adrian Khan, who has demonstrated consistent reliability." Unstable. Irresponsible. Those words didn't belong to her. They belonged to him. I scrolled to the bottom. The digital signature looked strange, jagged, unnatural. My mother's usual signature had a graceful loop at the end. This one ended abruptly. I knew right then that it was forged. But knowing wasn't enough. I needed proof, something legal, something undeniable. The next morning, I went to see Mr. Ahmed, my mother's lawyer. He looked startled when I showed up unannounced. "Mara," he said, standing to greet me. I wasn't expecting. "I need to ask you something," I said, my voice steady. "Did my mother ever contact you about changing her will?" He frowned, tapping his pen against the desk. "I can't disclose confidential details, but your mother did update her will last spring. I assumed you already knew." "Did she come here herself?" I asked. He hesitated. "Actually, no. Adrian brought the papers. Said your mother wasn't well enough to make the trip. I spoke to her briefly on the phone to confirm, but she sounded tired." "Tired?" I repeated bitterly. "Or coerced?" His brows furrowed. "Mara, are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting," I said, pulling the USB from my bag and setting it on his desk. "I'm telling you there's something wrong with that signature. I found this in her drawer. It contains both versions of her will." He stared at it for a moment, then sighed deeply. "If what you're saying is true, this could be serious." I could see the conflict in his face, the careful balance between professionalism and guilt. "Please," I said softly, "if you ever cared about my mother's integrity, help me find the truth." After a long pause, he nodded. "I'll have a handwriting expert look at it. Discreetly. Give me a few days." Those few days felt endless. Every sound in my house seemed amplified. The ticking clock, the groan of floorboards, the wind scraping against the windows. I couldn't stop picturing Adrian's calm face at the will reading, the confidence in his tone when he said, "She made her choice." He'd built that confidence on lies. When the call finally came, I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store, too anxious to move. Mr. Ahmed's voice was low but certain. "Mara, your mother's signature on the final will was not hers. The analyst confirmed it. The strokes don't match. It was copied, likely traced. And the metadata shows it was scanned and altered from a computer registered under Adrian's name." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like my heart had stopped. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "Yes. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. A quiet wave of both grief and fury washed through me. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth. About a man who'd used my mother's trust as a weapon. And I couldn't let him get away with it. That evening, I went to the house again. Not to confront him yet, but to see. To understand what kind of man my cousin had become. The gate was open. His car was parked out front, and through the window I could see him sitting in my mother's old armchair, sipping from one of her teacups like he belonged there. Something inside me snapped. I knocked hard. He opened the door, eyebrows raised. "Mara." "Again?" I held his gaze. "We need to talk." He stepped aside with an exaggerated sigh. "Fine. But make it quick. I have a meeting soon." I walked straight to the study and turned to face him. "You forged her will." His expression didn't change, not even a flicker. "Excuse me." "I have proof. The documents, the metadata, everything. You lied to her. Manipulated her. Made her think I wasn't responsible." He laughed, a small, cold laugh that made my skin crawl. "Proof? From where?" "From your imagination." "From her own drawer," I said firmly. "And from her lawyer." That made him pause. Just for a second. But it was enough. "I don't know what you think you've found," he said, voice low. "But you're walking on dangerous ground. Your mother trusted me. The court will see that." "No," I said, stepping closer. "The court will see you for what you are. A thief who used her love to steal everything she built." He clenched his jaw, but his eyes flicked toward the hallway, nervous, calculating. I realized he wasn't scared of me. He was scared of being found out. So I smiled, just slightly. "You should start packing, Adrian. Because the truth has a way of showing up. Even when you bury it." I walked out before he could reply. The night air was cold, but I felt something warm in my chest. Not peace, not yet, but power. For the first time since the will reading, I wasn't the helpless daughter. I was the woman who knew the truth. And I was going to make sure everyone else knew it too. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, court filings, and sleepless nights. Every time I thought about my mother's voice being twisted into those lies, I felt a fire burn deeper in me. I didn't want revenge. Not exactly. I wanted justice. I wanted her name, her memory, to be clean again. Mr. Ahmed agreed to take the case quietly. He said it would take time, forensics, testimony, the court's slow grind. But when he handed me a folder with the expert's signature analysis, I finally saw it in black and white. Still, Adrian wasn't backing down. He hired his own lawyer, accused me of tampering with documents, even hinted I'd emotionally manipulated my mother before her death. It was cruel, but it was desperate. And desperation always cracks. The day of the hearing, the courtroom felt cold and hollow. Adrian sat a few seats away, calm as ever, wearing a navy suit that looked too sharp for someone who'd built his empire on deceit. When the judge entered, the air shifted. Everyone stood. Mr. Ahmed spoke first, presenting the expert's report, the USB metadata, and the two wills side by side. The forged signature glared under the document camera, uneven, hesitant, copied stroke for stroke. Then came the part that changed everything. Mr. Ahmed called a witness, Nurse Hina, who'd taken care of my mother in her final months. She looked nervous as she took the stand. Mara's mother. She often said she was proud of her daughter, Hina said softly. She never mentioned wanting to change her will. But I do remember Adrian coming by one day with papers. After that, she seemed upset. When I asked what was wrong, she said, "I hope my daughter forgives me for what I just signed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I felt my throat tighten. Those were my mother's last conscious words to someone other than me. Adrian's lawyer tried to discredit her. Asked about memory, medication, confusion. But the more he pushed, the calmer she became. She wasn't confused, Hina said firmly. She was heartbroken. When it was Adrian's turn to speak, he did what he always did best, he performed. He talked about loyalty, about how he'd helped manage the family affairs when I was too emotional. He said my mother asked him to take over. But when the judge asked him directly about the metadata, why the altered will came from his computer, he hesitated. That 2-second silence spoke louder than all his rehearsed lines. By the time the hearing ended, I already knew what the verdict would be. A week later, I received the official letter. The court had ruled in my favor. The original will, my mother's true will, was reinstated. Adrian was found guilty of document fraud and ordered to repay damages. He didn't show up for the final ruling. Word spread later that he'd sold his car and left town. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. Because justice, I realized, doesn't erase betrayal. It just stops it from spreading. I went back to the house one last time. It looked smaller than I remembered. Emptier somehow, stripped of all the warmth my mother had once filled it with. In the study, the same one where Adrian had once gloated in my face, I sat down at her desk. There, tucked beneath the false bottom drawer I'd missed before, I found a sealed envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single page, written in her careful looping script. My dearest Mara, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get to explain everything in time. I know you've always believed in the good in people, even when it hurts you. I saw that light in you since you were little. I hope you never lose it. I'm sorry if I've caused you pain with the decisions made in my last days. I was weak, and I let others convince me that protecting you meant keeping you away. Please know, I never stopped trusting you. I only stopped trusting myself. This home, this life, everything I built, it was always meant for you. But more than that, I want you to inherit the strength to stand alone, even when the world turns its back. With all my love, Mom. Tears blurred the ink before I could finish reading. I pressed the letter to my chest and just let myself cry, not from anger this time, but from release. For so long, I'd been chasing justice like it would bring her back. But in that letter, I realized she'd never left me. Her words, her belief, her love, they were still here. I sold the house a few months later. Not because I wanted the money, but because I needed a new beginning. Somewhere her memory wouldn't be tangled in betrayal. Before I left, I buried a copy of her letter beneath the old jasmine tree she loved, right next to the bench where she used to sit with her tea. As the soil covered the envelope, a calm washed over me. For the first time, it didn't feel like losing her. It felt like letting her rest. People still ask if I ever heard from Adrian again. The answer is no, and I don't need to, because every time I walk past a jasmine plant, or smell that faint, sweet scent she loved so much, I hear her voice again. Don't let pain turn you bitter, Mara. Let it make you brave. And that's what I did. I stopped being the girl who was disinherited, and became the woman who reclaimed her truth.